Psychopathic AIs, alien moons, and candidate for U.S. Senate, Austin Peterson. All this and more on today's JPD Weekly. All right, so if you haven't noticed, I am not on my normal set today. I actually injured my knee and cannot get down to the basement in order to utilize all the nice equipment and everything. So I am bedridden upstairs for now. Injured my knee. It's all part of a bone disease thing that I have. It's not a huge deal. I'm okay. Might need surgery though, so prayers are appreciated. So hopefully next week, we'll be back in the studio and we'll have some nice audio and video for you, but we'll just have to make up for it by having extra interesting stories this week. And there are some interesting stories. For example, first off, Columbia and Yale scientists found supposedly the spiritual part of our brains, and they say that religion is not required. But what do you think? So, of course, this goes back to the observation versus interpretation part of science and faith. We can observe the same things. You can observe that things light up in the brain or whatever, but what they interpret it to mean is subjective. So let's go through this. Scientists seek to quantify everything, of course, even the ineffable. And so the human search for meaning recently took a physical turn as Columbia and Yale University researchers isolated the place in our brain that possesses spiritual experiences. So in this new study, which is published in Cerebral Cortex on May 29th, neuroscientists explain how they generated personally relevant spiritual experiences in a diverse group of subjects and scanned their brains while these experiences were happening. And the results indicate that there's a neurobiological home for spirituality. So when we feel a sense of connection with something greater than ourselves, whether transcendence involves communion with God or nature or humanity, a certain part of the brain appears to activate. And the study suggests that there is universal cognitive basis for spirituality as opposed to a cultural grounding for such states. And this new discovery, researchers say, could help improve mental health treatment down the line. So previous studies have examined the brain activity of Buddhist monks or Catholic nuns, people who are already spiritually inclined and familiar with the practice of cultivating transcendent states. But this research analyzed subjects from different backgrounds with varying degrees of faith and different spiritual beliefs and stuff, which is a totally different individual notions of what constitutes a spiritual experience. So, of course, then how do they know what they're measuring? So here's a quote from the article. It says, although studies have linked specific brain measures to aspects of spirituality, none have sought to directly examine spiritual experiences, particularly when using a broader modern definition of spirituality that may be independent of religiousness, the study explains. So because there are many types of transcendent moments with varying degrees of meaning to different people, it's been difficult to test the general effects of spirituality as opposed to religiosity. So for this study, the researchers generated individual scripts and put each subject in their own relevant transcendent state. Now, with each of the 27 subjects, all young, healthy adults, the researchers created a personal script based on each person's self-reported previous spiritual experience. The scientists then scanned brain activity when generating such a state in the subjects. And during their varied transcendent states, all subjects showed similar activity patterns in the parietal cortex, which processes sensation, spatial orientation, and language, and is thought to influence attention, among other functions. So in other words, whether the thing that makes a person feel connected to something greater involves church or trees or a stadium full of sports fans, it appears to have the same effect on the brain. Now, before continuing on, I'll throw my 2 cents in here. What does it matter? You close your eyes to pray and you close your eyes to sleep. It doesn't mean that they're the same thing. So just because it lights up the same part of the brain, it doesn't mean that it's a spiritual experience the way that we would think so. That's the problem with using such broad terms. Typically, we see this on the left. We see this with a lot of non-conservative types. But you use a broad term, and then you can put everything in that term, and then you can kind of shift reality around and make it mean whatever you want to mean. You can change the definition of terms based on whatever you need. So like the headline said, God doesn't need to be involved in this. Well, it turns out they're not really talking about spirituality at all. So continuing on, the effect on the brain is distinct from the effect of other forms of relaxation, according to researchers. So here's a quote: "We observed in the spiritual condition as compared with neutral relaxing condition, reduced activity in the left inferior parietal lobule, or IPL, a result that suggests that IPL may contribute importantly to perceptual processing and self-other representations during spiritual experiences. So these changes in the brain, they are thinking may help explain why during spiritual experiences the barrier between self and others can be reduced or even eliminated altogether. Although we need some separation between ourselves and everyone else for protection and to manage reality. Removing the barrier every so often, they think, is valuable. But again, it's such a broad term. What does a spiritual experience mean? It doesn't mean a Christian experience. Now, we as Christians would say the only true experience that you can have is with the God of the Bible, or with something under that umbrella. But it sounds like they're throwing anything in with this, Buddhists or whatever. So here's Yale psychiatry and neuroscience professor Mark Potenza says, spiritual experiences are robust states that may have profound impact on people's lives. So that's how he is defining it. Well, that really could be anything. Continuing on in his quote, understanding the neural bases of spiritual experiences might help us better understand their roles in resilience and recovery from mental health and addictive disorders. All good stuff, but again, you have to properly define what a spiritual experience is. It sounds like it could just be appreciation for anything. I mean, if they're comparing it with watching a sports game, that's not a spiritual experience. You might get excited or something, but that's not the same thing. So again, you close your eyes to pray, you close your eyes to sleep. It doesn't mean that they are the same thing. It doesn't mean that closing your eyes are connected in any way. So continuing on, entertaining more than angels. Have you ever heard of what is known as, I got to find the term here, Theoxeny? I'd never heard of this, but this is interesting. This comes from Christian Today International. But so in the Odyssey of Homer, the concept of theoxeny emerges clearly in Book 16. And here, Odysseus' son, Telemachus, I might be pronouncing that wrong, but finally comes in contact with his father, but he does not recognize him because he has been disguised as an old beggar. When Athena removes Odysseus' disguise, returning his appearance to his heroic self, Telemachus grows afraid, not because of the sudden transformation itself as we would expect, but because he is afraid that he did not show proper hospitality to a god in disguise, a little g god. Now, in his worldview, the gods are wanting to test people's characters by whether they show proper hospitality, or what's called xenia. So Telemachus fears that he did not pass the test. He did not lead this old beggar into his palace to entertainment. So another example emerges, and for Christians out there, this might seem familiar already, because we're given this strange warning that you don't know when you're entertaining angels, and that could fall under the umbrella of this term. So another example emerges in Odysseus's subsequent interaction with other suitors. So on one occasion, a more sober-minded suitor pauses to second guess at the wicked action of the ringleader Antinos, excuse me, saying that he did something egregious by striking a stranger because he might have struck a god. Now, of course, Antinos reveals his hubris by dismissing that idea, and a few lines later, Telemachus says, Antinos beyond the rest is like Black Death. So if we theologize the Odyssey in broad strokes with some imagination, then Odysseus's homecoming can be seen as a literary theoxeny. That's what this term is. Odysseus is a stand-in for a god. After all, he's disguised as a beggar, and he observes, tests, and judges wickedness. Odysseus makes this point clear in Book 22 when he says that the fate of the gods punished these suitors on account of their lack of xenia. In the least, Odysseus sees himself as an instrument of divine judgment. And from this perspective, the whole of the Odyssey is an extended story of theoxeny, a point that would not have been missed in the ancient world where the line between men and gods was permeable. Now, moving from the Greek world to the Roman world, and then we'll get into some Bible stuff, but the idea of theoxeny is still alive and well. The most well-known Roman story, which illustrates this undeniably, is the myth of Philemon and Baucis, in which the centerpiece of Ovid's Metamorphosis. So Jupiter and Mercury come disguised as peasants looking for a place to stay the night 1,000 homes reject them, but when they come to a small cottage, a poor couple who lives there, Philemon and Baucis, receive the gods and show great generosity. They give out of their poverty and are even about to kill their only goose just to feed these guests. Now, at this point, Jupiter tells them not to do such a thing. Instead, he bids them to flee because destruction will come upon the town for their exceeding wickedness. Jupiter is true to his word, and a flood destroys the town, but the humble cottage of Philemon and Baucis is turned into a temple. So moreover, Jupiter allows them to die together in their old age as they wish. He even transforms them into an intertwining pair of trees, one a linden tree and the other an oak, to symbolize their lasting love for one another and their hospitality towards the gods. Now, the moral of these stories is simple, these myths, that the gods test the character of people through hospitality. So as Homer states, quote, "For the gods do take on all sorts of transformations, appearing as strangers from elsewhere to see which men keep the laws and which are violent," end quote. So it's no wonder that the Romans, who considered themselves the most religious people on earth, even had a religious rite called lectisternium, which literally means to spread a couch. Now, in this rite, the Romans prepared a table with food for the gods. More specifically, it was a rite of hospitality to restore peace with the gods. The Greeks and Romans believed that it was possible, important, and necessary to entertain complete strangers because they could be gods in disguise. Where does this sound familiar, Christians? So there is we can actually find Theoxeny in the Bible. So given this motif in ancient Greco-Roman literature, it shouldn't be too surprising that we find examples of this in the Bible. And the thread of showing hospitality to God himself or angelic beings who represent God, that is stitched into scripture all throughout the Bible. The flood narrative is the first example. While Genesis 6 doesn't explicitly say that God walked on the earth to examine the hearts of people, he did see, regret, and judge. And we get that from Genesis 6, 5-7. But moreover, he extensively communicated with Noah. After all, he gave building instructions for the ark. This is certainly speculative, but it's notable that all the flood narratives in Greek and Roman literature have the lack of Xenia as the cause for the flood. So we're on firmer ground when we come to Abraham's three visitors in Genesis 18. Genesis 18:1 makes it explicit that the three men are divine visitors because the text states that, quote, "the Lord, Yahweh, appeared to Abraham near the great tree of Mamre." However, end quote. However, Abraham didn't know that this stranger was Yahweh because he addressed the lead figure with the appellation Adonai, which is an honorific title, and only later did Abraham realize that this figure was Yahweh. And we get that from Genesis 18, 13-14. Now, Abraham's virtuous character is on display in to show hospitality to these strangers. He bids them to wash their feet and rest under the tree. He then makes preparations, offering his own food and shelter to his guests. He has Sarah knead dough and make cakes, and he has a servant pick a choice calf and prepare it while he gets milk and puts it before the strangers. All that's from Genesis 18, 6-8. He honors them at his own expense. Now, unbeknownst to Abraham and Sarah, they have just engaged in theoxeny. And what makes Abraham's hospitality more significant is the contrast with the following story of Sodom and Gomorrah. These cities were inhospitable in the worst possible way. So the juxtaposition of these stories makes this point as stark as possible. According to Genesis 18:20, the cry against these cities is so great that the mysterious visitors have to see evil for themselves. When they arrive, only one man shows hospitality, which is Lot. And at night, the men of the city, young and old, come to Lot's house and demand that the visitors come out because they want to rape Lot's visitors, essentially. Now, the sin of omission would have been bad enough, neglecting the strangers. But in this narrative, the wickedness is so brazen that they want to violate these strangers in the most violent way possible. They make Odysseus's suitors look like cheeky schoolboys at best, mere amateurs of iniquity. But the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah is evident in their perverse disregard for showing hospitality to their guests. Now, moving to Exodus, the bread of presence may be seen as an example of theoxeny, showing similarity to the rite of lectisternium among the Romans. And that's a hard word to say. In Moses' elaborate instructions for the tabernacle, there is a lavishly appointed table on which the bread of presence should be placed. So we get that from Exodus 25, 23 through 30, and also Leviticus 24, 1 through 9. Now, while neither Exodus nor Leviticus explains the significance of this bread, it's reasonable to conclude that this bread shows the nearness of God and the hospitality that the Israelites can and should show to God by replacing this bread weekly. Even if God does not consume the food, Aaron and his sons actually partake of that, it was a gesture of dining in the presence of God. Now, likewise, the sacrifices may have been seen from this perspective as well. Now, to be sure, the sacrifices are full with theological meaning that far exceeds any theology of xenia, but good hospitality is certainly present. The people should only give their best to God. Malachi makes this point when he indicts the priests for offering blind, diseased, and lame sacrifices. He actually just says, quote, "Try offering them to your governor." And that's Malachi 1:8. So governors would not look kindly upon that type of giving, so why would God? Now, in the New Testament, the concept of theoxeny reaches a high point. God becomes man and walks among his creation. Every hint of theoxeny finds its fulfillment in the incarnation. John's prologue says it best when he says he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. That's John 1:11. Now, that there is no room for Jesus in the inn at his birth shows humanity's failing, and it'll continue. So at a dinner party in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus makes this very point. Quote, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet." And that's Luke. We get that whole thing from Luke 7:44 through 46. So as the story of the Gospels unfold, Christ is the long-awaited Messiah who preached the good news. He healed the sick. He drove out demons. He showed compassion and grace, mercy, all that good stuff. He was God in the flesh, but he was met with skepticism and rejection. He was mistreated. He was ultimately killed, as we know. He received no hospitality, anti-theoxeny, we could call it that. The power brokers of society got together and crucified him for a confluence of selfish reasons. So all humanity, therefore, stands condemned because of this. So putting it all together, the Christian hope, of course, is that none of this human sinfulness took God by surprise. God knew that humanity has been bent towards selfishness and sin since the fall of Adam and Eve. He also knew that Christ would be crucified. So therein lies the amazing grace. The triune God made a covenant to bless his people, knowing perfectly well that blessings could only come from the work of a crucified Messiah. God contemplated, what it would take to bless humanity, and he did it. And moreover, if we take the words of John 14 to heart, then Jesus has gone ahead of us through his death and resurrection to prepare a place for his people in the Father's house. That's John 14, 1 through 4. Now, while we were inhospitable like Sodom and Gomorrah, he showed us hospitality, divine xenia, completely undeserved for his people. So now, through the pouring out of the Holy Spirit, humanity can show the hospitality that it was created to give. So if we take one more step through the lens of theoxeny, we're living within an eschatological application of the parable of the wicked tenants, which is Matthew 21:33 through 46, and also Mark 12, 1 through 12. So just real quick, according to this parable, a man has planted a vineyard and he rented it out to tenants. And when the time of the harvest came, the owner sent a servant to collect some of the fruits. But the tenants seized the servant, beat him up, and did the same when other servants came. They repeated this mistreatment many times over and either beat or killed all the servants. So the landowner finally sent his son. He reasoned that they would surely listen to him, but the shameless tenants saw this as an opportunity to possess the land once and for all for themselves. So they reasoned if they killed the son, that the land would be theirs. The parable ends with this question: what then will the owner of the vineyard do? And that's Mark 12:9. So what indeed? If we are living within the framework of this parable, then this is a warning. Be faithful now and show hospitality now. There's wisdom in all these stories, whether they emerge from the ancient Near East, Greece, Rome, or Scripture. And that's not putting any of those other things on the same level as Scripture. I kind of look at, you can find similar themes throughout all the world's kind of mythologies, but that's all of what they are. They're just mythologies. They're just kind of a shadow of the real thing. We get the real thing in the gospel, in the Bible. That's where we get the real stuff. But it's to show hospitality now. Abraham went out of his way to bless the three strangers, and so this call to faithfulness, and particularly in hospitality, it presses against us, and it's the irresistible conclusion of these stories and the grace of Christ. So furthermore, it's one of the best ways to live, really. As we habituate our hearts to this generosity of giving, we shall edify the church. We get that. We get that in Scripture too. And some will entertain. Now this is Hebrews 13:2. Some will entertain angels, and all will be ready for the end of the age. So Matthew 25:1-13 talks about that. So moreover, if we take his word seriously, then by serving the least of our brethren, we actually serve him. That's Matthew 25:45. So the great encouragement is that we are all capable of showing generosity, not only because Christ took the punishment of our inhospitality, on himself on the cross, but also because he continues to demonstrate hospitality towards us. When we come to the table of bread and wine in churches all across the world, we're partakers in that eschatological meaning of his enduring and sacrificial hospitality. A broken body and shed blood still speaks volumes today. We get that in communion and stuff. So we're moving into a season when great hospitality and generosity are needed, probably more than ever. And I certainly pray that God will use these as a means of grace to open eyes and turn hearts. And we should get some good generosity and hospitality going. We should serve like Jesus. Actually, I did a presentation on this at the last Hear the Watchman conference on this channel. So it depends on if you're watching the weekly channel or the daily channel. But if you just type in Josh Peck, Hear the Watchman, serve like Jesus, you'll find it. But that's what that's all about. So this Theoxeny thing is actually pretty important. We should take it seriously. Okay, moving on. So an ancient Coptic text. Now it's interesting to me. I always find this interesting how things are sold. Like in the first thing that we talked about. We talked about, and for those who are watching the daily video, the first thing that we talked about was about how there's a place in the brain that's found to contain spirituality and God's not needed. It's interesting how these things are packaged. So the title of this, the headline says ancient Coptic text revealed to be a divination tool for predicting the future. Okay, interesting. Now, well, there are other headlines that say it's a Christian text, which, Coptic Christian, that's it all really just depends on locality. But usually you don't find the word Christian and divination tool in the same sentence. But anyway, so it's an interesting story. An ancient Christian oracle book of mysterious origins has recently been translated and found to contain a collection of encouragements, warnings, and cryptic divinations. Now, the 15-year-old tome, measuring less than 3 inches in height, has been translated from Coptic, which is an Egyptian language, and has surprised experts who initially presumed it was a typical gospel and understood it in the traditional sense, and thought it was a recounting of the life and death of Jesus. However, despite being titled The Gospel and Lots of Mary, this miniature codex is not about Christian figures, but instead it's a book of guidance and reassurance to be used as a resource for those seeking help for life's problems. So, according to Live Science, this volume is very unique. Professor of Religion at Princeton University, Anne Marie, I should not even try to pronounce this last name, Luijendijk. I don't know if that's Slavic or what. Anne Marie, who was appointed as head of Wilson College in 2017, she writes in her book, Forbidden Oracles, The Gospel of the Lots of Mary, quote, When I began deciphering the manuscript and encountered the word gospel in the opening line, I expected to read a narrative about the life and death of Jesus, as the canonical gospels present, or a collection of sayings similar to the Gospel of Thomas, which is a non-canonical text, end quote. However, upon translation of the elegantly written, Anne-Marie discovered few references to Jesus in the series of 37 oracles. So the gospel may have been this particular text. It may have been used for divination or prediction of the future. Life Science writes that a person with a problem could have asked a question of the book and gone through a process of randomly selecting one of the passages. And the book owner may have assisted as a diviner to interpret the written word. And it's also suggested that the book may have been referred to by an owner when needing guidance or solutions. It may have been open to a random page to find divinely inspired advice, which is kind of funny because I don't know if you've ever remembered doing this when you were a kid at church and you were bored. Did you ever do that where you and your friends from church, you just flip through the Bible and point to something and read it, and then you think that it's going to apply somehow? Well, it's really weird. Now, I think that's if you're doing it as kids, you're just kids playing around. You're not like actively involved in witchcraft or divination or anything. But it's interesting that apparently there were early Christians from 1500 years ago that were doing this. Now, I don't know if that falls in line with what we would think of as divination in a Christian sense, as in don't do that because it's wrong and evil. I don't know. When it comes to that kind of stuff, I say it's just best to not. It's best to just pray, and then if you're reading, if you happen to read something that hits and you feel that that's an answer from God, sure, that's happened to me, and I've talked about that before. But to try to initiate something, I think that's where divination, in the wrong sense, in the sense where the Bible condemns it, I think that's where that comes into play. If you're actively trying to get it kick-started, so to speak, it's kind of like God can catch you up to heaven and give you a nice vision and everything. That can happen, and I believe that sort of stuff does happen. But if you go out of your way to meditate and try to astral project to get yourself there, then that's wrong. Okay, so International Business Times provides examples of the translated entries, citing, so here's one passage that says, "O human, that you did your utmost again. You did not gain anything but loss, dispute, and war. But if you are patient a little, the matter will prosper through the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," end quote. Sort of sounds like a Christianized version of a fortune cookie or something. Here's another entry. Quote, "Stop being of two minds, O human, whether this thing will happen or not. Yes, it will happen. Be brave and do not be of two minds, because it will remain with you a long time and you will receive joy and happiness," end quote. Now, of course, we don't find anything like this in Scripture, in actual God-breathed, inspired Scripture. There's nothing like this because it would be too easy. It'd be really just too easy to disprove. I mean, it's like a magic 8-ball. Maybe it'll be right sometimes, but it's going to be wrong sometimes too. So that's why this divination stuff. That's why it's for lack of better word, frowned upon, from the Bible. It's actually just strictly forbidden. But so divination, the word, it's from the Latin to foresee or to be inspired by God. And it's the idea of gaining insight into the future or learning the answers to troubling questions through really occultic rituals and with sacred objects. It's a practice that's existed all throughout time, across cultures all around the world, not unlike fortune cookies or horoscopes, like I just mentioned, or tarot cards or other means of divination. So the Gospel of the Lots of Mary seems a tool of this type of thing. So Anne-Marie, right? I feel bad using her first name, but I don't even know where to start with her last name. But she writes, quote, "The practice of casting lots to obtain an answer was widespread in antiquity. It was a method applied in decision-making on all levels of ancient society as a religious practice. Lot divination was also highly contested, as access to these practices and thus to the divine meant control of powers religiously and socially," end quote. Now, I tend to think that casting lots is a little different because you're assigning, well, see, even lots, though, I don't know. Even that, I don't know. Well, for example, there is a story of, and I forget who right now, but one of the prophets somewhere in the Old Testament. Somebody will have to tell me what it is, but one of the prophets, he was asking God a question. He was worried about something. I can't remember if it was a war or something like that. But he took I think it was like a doormat or a blanket or something and put it on his floor, and he prayed and said, "Okay, Lord, if I wake up and this thing is soaking wet, then it'll mean this thing, and that I should go and do this. And if it's still dry, then I'll do this other thing." And he woke up and it was wet, and then he had his answer. So it seems like when we allow God, not that we have to allow God to do anything, he'll do what he wants. But if we're trying to work with God and get an answer, but we're not doing we're not trying to initiate it, we're like giving him the option. It seems to be different. But even that today, I don't know. I wouldn't. For me, I wouldn't throw a towel on the ground and say, well, if it's wet tomorrow, then I guess I'll have to, go move out of state or whatever decision that I'm coming up with. But I also wouldn't cast lots. I wouldn't flip a coin. I wouldn't make decisions like that, whether that's right or wrong. I would pray, and then I would just trust that God would lead me to the right decision. Maybe that's a form of that. I don't know. But so is casting lots divination? I don't know. God seemed fine with the wet blanket thing on the floor. I don't think that would be divination necessarily. It seems like actual divination means that you're trying to force an answer. You're trying to you're the one that's going to tell God he's got to give you an answer. And I think when you're actually trying to work with God, I think he can tell you in a variety of ways. But I think just, praying, trusting that God will show you, I think that's the way to go. And maybe it varies from person to person because we are all different. If you have kids of your own, think about how you talk to your kids. Your kids have different personalities. You probably talk to them each a little bit different, playing to their strengths and trying to help them through their unique weaknesses. So anyway, continuing on, this discovery follows the translation of another ancient Egyptian codex written in Coptic, which dates back 1,300 years and deciphered for the first time in 2014. That one, excuse me one second, the page refreshed, so now I got to go and find it again. But yeah, it's just not letting me see it anymore. But anyway, yeah, there have been other texts like that have been translated in the past. I mean, it's all really interesting stuff, and it is interesting that historically this stuff was going on because I wouldn't think of Christian. I think typically we wouldn't think of Christian divination as a thing because how could divination be Christian? But of course, that's just a title that people who find this put on it. But anyway, so there was another Egyptian codex that was written in Coptic. It dates back 1,300 years, and it was deciphered for the first time in 2014, and it's kind of similar. So, okay. So that's really interesting, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on it. Is casting lots divination? Should we be partaking in any of that? I mean, I say no. I think it's best to just let God lead. You don't need to do any of that. It's not like you have to have that for God to talk to you. I mean, if God wants to talk to you, he'll talk to you. It's not God's not going to be up there in heaven saying, "Oh, well, he didn't cast lots or he didn't flip a coin, so guess there's no way I can tell him what he's got to do." It doesn't work like that. He's your father. You can pray to him and you can ask him questions. Okay. Now, this is interesting. Can the state force a painter to promote Satan? Now, of course, there's a lot of blurry lines here and a lot of really broad stroke definitions. So let's dig into this a little bit. Now, this actually comes from townhall.com. So here's like a nice little narrative to kind of paint the picture, no pun intended. When you drove down California Street through San Francisco's Richmond district in the 1970s, there was one house that would make a stronger impression than most. This is not because the house was an architectural marvel. It was just a small cookie cutter Victorian house, nothing out of the ordinary, but it stood out because it was painted all black. From sidewalk to rooftop, every inch of this thing was coated in uniform darkness. Now, its owner in those days was Anton LaVey, author of the Satanic Bible, and years later, when it was about to be torn down, the San Francisco Chronicle would refer to it as the building that once housed San Francisco's sordid Church of Satan. I've actually been looking into Anton LaVey for an upcoming project that I can't disclose really anything about, except just wait till the end of the year. Your minds are going to be blown. So this kind of stuck out at me, and yeah, I mean, what an evil guy. So the Black Pope, as he liked to be called, Anton LaVey, he was a self-proclaimed sorcerer with a devilish penchant for marketing. That's how the Chronicle reported him in a story published March 22nd, 2001. Quote, while the nation's media, led by the San Francisco papers, regularly descended upon the 1905 Victorian to pen the latest weird act to emanate from LaVey's bizarre chambers, his great contribution, if that's the correct term, to counterculture was a 1969 manifesto called the Satanic Bible, which his followers and publicists claimed sold more than 1 million copies, end quote. Anton LaVey died in 1997, and the Black House was torn down in 2001. But looking back, there can be no doubt that this house and its black paint were evidence of what the Chronicle called LaVey's devilish penchant for marketing. Now, suppose a new denomination also presenting itself as satanic were to rise up today in Colorado, and the leader of this hypothetical church buys a house in a prominent place with plans to paint it black in the hope of marketing its faith. Now, could the state of Colorado force a Christian painter to do this job? It's an interesting question, because following the reasoning presented in Justice Anthony Kennedy's opinion in Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission, the answer would be yes. And of course, again, this is an opinion from Justice Anthony Kennedy. So long as the Colorado state officials forcing the Christian to paint the Satanic Church black were enforcing a, quote, generally applicable law, end quote, and took a neutral approach in the painter's religion. So in Masterpiece, the question was whether Colorado could force a Christian baker to make a customized wedding cake for a same-sex wedding. And the baker said this violated both his First Amendment rights to the free exercise of religion and freedom of speech. Absolutely. But Kennedy's majority opinion did not offer a conclusion on the baker's free speech claim, but it did make clear that the court believes a state can force a Christian to act against his faith. So Kennedy is quoted as saying the reason and the motive for the baker's refusal were based on his sincere religious beliefs and convictions. The court's precedents make clear that the baker, in his capacity as the owner of a business serving the public, might have his right to the free exercise of religion limited by generally applicable laws, end quote. So the reason the court reversed Colorado's action in this specific case was because the Colorado Civil Rights Commission had not been neutral in its treatment of religions and had showed hostility towards the baker's Christian faith. So specifically, the commission had allowed 3 other bakers to refuse to make cakes that would have featured religious arguments against same-sex marriage, and some of the commissioners had publicly made disparaging remarks about the Christian baker's religious convictions when they held hearings on his refusal to make a cake for a same-sex wedding. Now, rather than enforcing the law in a neutral way, they had demonstrated bias against the particular against a particular religious view. So Kennedy wrote, quote, still the delicate question, and of course, for those who aren't familiar with this, the baker won the case. I think it was 7-2, but then, CNN and all these people were saying that it was a really tight decision, and it wasn't. It was a landslide. So, of course, the Christian baker was in the right. He was correct. The gay couple in question, he didn't refuse service. They could have come in and bought anything that they wanted. They could have bought a cake at that cake shop. The problem was they were asking him to make a specific cake. They were asking him to make a piece of art to celebrate something that he fundamentally doesn't believe in celebrating. It would be like if you were forced to paint a painting that you didn't agree with morally, and then the state comes in and tries to force you to do it. That's what these gay bullies were really trying to do. But thankfully, it didn't work. The gay bullies lost and the baker won. But that's what's being talked about now. So Kennedy was against this decision, and he said, he wrote, quote, still the delicate question of when the free exercise of the baker's religion must yield to an otherwise valid exercise of state power needed to be determined, and in education in which religious hostility on the part of the state itself would not be a factor in the balance of in the balance the state sought to reach. When the Colorado Civil Rights Commission considered the case, it did not do so with the religious neutrality that the Constitution requires, end quote. So the court let stand the Colorado law that makes it unlawful to deny someone services, not only because of their sexual orientation, but because of their creed, and the possibility this law can be enforced in a way that compels someone to act against their faith. So the founder of a self-styled satanic church approaches a devoutly Christian painter, asks him to paint the house he uses as his church black, and the painter believes everything he does in life, including his work, must show reverence for Christ. So he declines. Now, could Colorado still force him to act against his faith? Against his faith, excuse me. Under the standing Supreme Court precedent, it could, so long as the law was applied to everyone with what Kelly calls the neutrality that the free exercise clause requires, end quote. So we still have a court that believes that under the right circumstances, when done in the correct manner, the government can require Christians to act against their faith. So, again, while this Baker deal, this Christian Baker deal is a win, it's not necessarily for reasons that we might think. And there could be certain situations which would be worse, where Christians can be forced by the state to do or partake in things that they wouldn't want to, that would be against their faith, such as a painter. So it's an interesting question. I'd like to know what you think. Do you think that if you're a painter, you're just a painter, and faith should not play any part in it, and you should just do your job and shut up? And if you're going to discriminate, then you should, be fined or be in trouble? Or are you are you on the side of, well, it's his business, he can do what he wants to it? If he wants to discriminate against people, whatever, they can always go find another painter who won't have any problem doing it. And if the free market decides, if this decision is so unpopular, then people won't go to him and he'll lose his business. So the free market works it out all in the end. Do you think that, or do you think, well, it's not discrimination, he just doesn't want to do anything against his faith, and he shouldn't be forced to, and that's that, and however the consequences lay out after that, that's just how it is? I'd like to know what you think. Leave me a comment in the comment section below. All right, continuing on. There has been some recent evidence, rare evidence actually, on how Jesus died. It's the Roman crucifixion is not Jesus's, but there's rare evidence of a Roman crucifixion that's been found, which can shed some light on how this whole thing actually happened. So the body of a man buried in northern Italy 2,000 years ago. Excuse me, I got a killer earache. But I've had to sleep weird the past few nights because of my knee, and yeah. But anyway. Excuse me. Okay. Prayers would be appreciated. So the body of a man buried in northern Italy 2,000 years ago shows signs that he died after being nailed to a wooden cross. And the method used for the execution of Jesus is, of course, crucifixion, and it's described in the Bible. Now, although crucifixion was a common form of capital punishment for criminals and slaves in ancient Roman times, the new findings say that this is actually only the second time that a direct archaeological evidence of this type of thing has been found, even though it was really super common. But a new study, of the skeletal remains of the man found near Venice in 2007 reveals a lesion and unhealed fracture on one of the heel bones that suggests his feet had been nailed to the cross. And the researchers from the universities of Ferrara and Florence in Italy say their findings aren't conclusive because of the poor condition of the bones and because the other heel bone is missing, nor have they found evidence that the body was nailed up by the wrists, which, was the common method of Roman crucifixion described in the Bible is used in the execution of Jesus. That's how it's believed it was done. You nail through the wrist so you can hold up the body. And there's still some controversy on that, whether it was the hand or the wrist. And of course, we read hand in English, but in Greek, it could mean something else. So the skeletal remains were found at Gavello, about 25 miles southwest of Venice, during archaeological excavations in preparation for the laying of a pipeline. And the researchers said in their study published online April 12th in the Journal of Archaeological and Anthropological Sciences that this was the case. So unusually for a Roman era burial, the body had been buried directly in the ground instead of being placed in a tomb and without any burial goods. The researchers ran genetic and biological tests on the remains, finding that they were from a man of below average height, slim stature, who was between 30 and 34 years old when he died. The lack of grave goods and the dead man's relatively small build suggest that he might have been an underfed slave who was buried without the regular Roman funeral ceremonies, which was commonly part of the punishment for executed prisoners, the researchers said. So a depressed, unhealed fracture in the heel bone suggested a metal nail had been driven through it from the inside to the outside of the right foot, either directly onto the wood of a cross or into a wooden footrest attached to a cross. So lead study author Emanuela Galdi, who's a medical anthropologist at University of Ferrara, told Live Science, quote, "We found a particular lesion on the right calcaneus or heel bone passing through the entire bone," end quote. So in this research paper, Galdi and her colleagues noted that the Romans had learned of crucifixion from the Carthaginians and used it as a form of capital punishment for almost 1,000 years until Emperor Constantine banned it in the 4th century AD. Roman crucifixions were designed to cause maximum pain for a prolonged period. Victims' feet and wrists were usually nailed to a wooden cross, which would hold them upright while they suffered a slow and agonizing death, often taking several days. And as such, it was usually carried out only for the execution of slaves in Roman society. The bodies were often left on the cross to rot or be eaten by animals, but in some cases they were removed and buried. And regarding the remains from Gavello, there were no signs that the man was nailed up by the wrist. Instead, his arms may have been tied to the cross with ropes, which was also done at the time sometimes. So crucifixions are often described in historical writings from ancient Roman times, including when Roman soldiers executed 6,000 captured slaves after the revolt led by gladiator Spartacus in the 1st century BC. Think about how brutal a crucifixion is. Just think about that. And also think about at the same time how powerful God is. This means of execution was designed to cause the most amount of human suffering possible for the longest amount of time possible. God didn't stop that. God, knowing that he was going to put on the flesh of a man, knowing that he was going to be born into the world as a man, and he was going to have nerve endings, and he was going to experience pain, knowing that he was going to endure this horrific execution for all of us. He didn't do anything to make this a less painful death. He's God. He can do whatever he wants. He could have shifted the tides of history to maybe they invent a type of execution like hanging that isn't as bad or something. But no, he let them do it. He let them devise this just wicked and terrible means of executing somebody, this totally inhumane way. He allowed that, knowing he was going to have to endure it himself for all of us. And now we can look back and think, wow, he loves us that much that he allowed himself to be put through that when he's all powerful and he could have stopped it. He could have done it differently and we never would have known. We wouldn't even have had any information to be critical of, but he didn't. And that shows how truly powerful and loving our God is. Jesus is amazing. It's phenomenal. Now, undoubtedly, the most infamous crucifixion, of course, was of Jesus of Nazareth. Infamous because it was just a horrific way to die. Famous because it's Jesus and he conquered death afterwards anyway. Now, this, of course, is described in the Bible. It's as taking place in Jerusalem under Roman rule at the beginning of the Christian era between AD 30 and 36, somewhere in that area. Now, no confirmed archaeological evidence of that event has been found, but the biblical accounts of the crucifixion of Jesus, of course, are a core Christian belief, and the cross has been a symbol of Christianity throughout history. The only other time that the remains of a crucifixion victim had been found was in 1968. 1968 during an excavation of a Roman-era tomb in Jerusalem. And then those excavations of these tombs, Greek archaeologist Vasilios Zafaris found that a 7-inch long nail had been driven through the heel bone of a man found in one of the tombs. The nail was found in place within the bone, attached to a small piece of olive wood, which was part of the wooden cross where the man had been hung to die. So the scientists who studied the recent remains from Gavelos said victims of Roman-era crucifixions were hard to identify because of the state of the ancient bones and the difficulties of making scientific interpretation of the injuries. Gualdi told Live Science that bones with these types of lesions were more easily fractured, difficult to preserve, hard to recognize, and in addition, the metal crucifixion nails were often salvaged from a body after death and, repurposed or whatever. But the regular burial of human remains at Gavelos still presents many questions. So Gualdi is quoted as saying, "We cannot know if he was a prisoner, but the burial marginalization indicates that he probably was an individual deemed dangerous or defamed in the Roman society," end quote. Okay, so interesting stuff. I'd like to know what you think about that. Any time we can learn more about what Jesus did for us, I think is a good thing, and we can get a lot from that. And even just reflecting back on what that time must have been like. It's just phenomenal. Yet, here in our day, if Netflix doesn't work, we get really upset, or if the internet goes out or something, it's the end of the world. Okay, let's totally switch gears here. Fox News has put out a story. The moons of some giant alien planets could host life. Now, this is interesting. It kind of, there was also a recent story about some type of organic matter, not life, but found on Mars. And actually, if you want, well, you could pick up my book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, because we talk about that stuff a lot. But Dr. Michael Heiser has put out a short blog or article, whatever you want to call it, on that. I suggest you go read it. It's good stuff. He's always top notch when it comes to alien UFO stuff and how Christians should look at it. So just look up Dr. Michael Heiser, Mars Life Discovery, whatever, you'll find it. Or you can just go to drmsh.com. That's his website. You can find it there. But researchers, and it shows how prevalent this whole alien stuff is in our culture, like how badly people really want this to be true. And hey, like I said in The Day the Earth Stands Still, I don't know if there's life out there. Maybe there is. I don't think that if there is life out there in the universe, I don't think it's connected to the UFO and alien abduction phenomena, whatever, the multiple form of phenomena. I don't think it's connected to those. I don't think the UFO phenomenon and the alien abduction phenomenon are even necessarily related. But you'll have to get that book or just look at my interviews. If you can't afford the book, that's fine. All that's at joshpeckdisclosure.com. But so Fox News reports that researchers have identified more than 100 giant exoplanets that might have potentially life-hosting moons. And the new analysis could change the way that scientists search for life in the cosmos. So that search has generally focused on places more or less like Earth, rocky planets in what's called the habitable zone or the Goldilocks zone of their host star, that just right range of distances where liquid water could potentially exist on a world surface. So Jupiter-like planets don't seem like good candidates in this regard because they have no discernible surface. But the rocky moons of such gas giants might be a different story. So the team members of this study has said this. It's actually, the study is called How Habitable Zones for Alien Planets and Stars Work, and it's infographic. So, quote, this comes from study co-author Stephen Kane, an associate professor of planetary astrophysics at UCR, and a member of UCR's Alternative Earth's Astrobiology Center. It's a long title, but he said, quote, there are currently 175 known moons orbiting the 8 places in our solar system. While most of these moons orbit Saturn and Jupiter, which are outside of the sun's habitable zone, they may not be the case in other solar systems. including rocky exomoons in our search for life in space will greatly expand the places we can look, end quote. The research team poured through the databases of NASA's Kepler Space Telescope, which has discovered about 70% of the 3,700 known exoplanets to date. They flagged 121 gas giants that appear to orbit in the habitable zone. Now, no exomoons have yet been confirmed, but if those huge exoplanets have natural satellites, which seems likely, given how common moons are in our own solar system, they could be especially promising abodes for life, study team members said. So, for example, potential life forms on their surfaces could tap energy coming directly from their star and light reflected off their parent planet as well. So here's another quote. This is from the study's lead author, Michelle Hill, who's an undergraduate student at the University of Southern Queensland, who is working with Kane. Now, she says, quote, now that we have created a database of known giant planets in the habitable zone of their star, observations of the best candidates for hosting potential exomoons will be made to help refine the expected exomoon properties. And, oh, no, not end quote. There's a little bit more. Continuing quote. Our follow-up studies will help inform future telescope design so that we can detect these moons, study their properties, and look for signs of life. So the new study has been accepted for publication in the Astrophysical Journal, and you can read a copy of it for free online. So interesting stuff. I'm curious to know what you think about this. Is this just a fruitless effort? Is this a fruitless search? Should we not even be wasting money on this? There's a good case that could be made for that. Or is it the most important thing ever, and we absolutely should be searching out there? You know, I think if we're going to be doing space stuff, I like the idea of privatized companies handling it instead of the government. Because some people just feel that we shouldn't be messing around with that, and that's fine. I don't think that their taxpayer dollars should go to fund something that they don't believe it should, you know, that they have some objection to. That's why I like the idea of privatized companies. If they want to go and do it, fine, you know, whatever. But, you know, just as a whole, just the larger moral issue, I'm still split because I think it's fascinating. I don't think we're going to find anything, but, if we find anything, I don't think that we'll be told. And if we are told, we're not going to be left to interpret it for ourselves. What would happen is if they discovered life, for one thing, if they discovered life, they likely, you know, if it's the government doing it, likely would not tell us. Privatized company might not tell us either. They wouldn't have really any, they wouldn't have any obligation to, although if they did, like if there was some sort of life race out in the cosmos and you had different privatized companies competing, the first one to make that discovery would go down in history forever. I mean, that would just be huge. So, you know, maybe with a privatized company, we might get some more honesty. Although then that would also, but you get the same with the government, that would also expand the temptation to fake something, you know, but I think there would be, you know, I think in our technological age, there'd be a lot of checks and balances and it would be hard to fake. Still could happen though. But so that's one way of looking at it. But yeah, if it is found, whoever finds it, whether it's the government or a privatized company, whether it's a single cell or an actual, you know, like an animal type creature or a conscious being, it's going to be interpreted for us. There's no reality where we're just going to get the facts. You know, this is exactly what happened. This is what we see, and now we leave it to the public to decide what it means. They'll weave in what it means in with the explanation of what is found. They do this all the time. I mean, you do this in any look at any story that we've even looked at today or throughout this whole channel. The headline, even right in the headline, you get the opinion of who's ever supposedly reporting on the news. It doesn't matter what they're talking about. If you're watching the weekly show, we've already seen this about 3 or 4 times just in this show so far. So there's no reality where we don't have to deal with separating out the facts from the opinion of whoever is giving us, you know, the news. Now, what if it's not life? What if it's like an artifact or something? Like, what if they actually do find a confirmed artifact on the moon or Mars, and it's something from some ancient civilization years ago or something. Yeah, and some would say that that's already been found, and I don't know if it has, but I would say if it ever is found, we'll see exactly what we're seeing now with people who think that they have been found. It'll be obscured. We'll be laughed at for believing that it might be real, and then they'll sit on it until they can best capitalize on it. Now, again, this is why I like privatized companies, because I think a privatized company would have more incentive to be honest, though also, again, privatized companies have more incentive to fake something. So, it's hard to tell, but I am interested to know your opinions about this. Leave me a comment in the comment section below. Okay, last one before we go to Austin Petersen, who is running for U.S. Senate. For Missouri, actually, my state. There is apparently now a terrifying psychopathic artificial intelligence named Norman. So yeah, talk about a pessimistic worldview. Now, Norman, this new algorithm created by scientists at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, sees the negative to the extreme as compared to normal algorithms generated by artificial intelligence. So where a regular algorithm sees a group of birds sitting atop of a tree, Norman sees someone being electrocuted. So, an image that a non-psychopathic algorithm sees as a group of people standing by a window is viewed as someone jumping from the window by Norman. So the MIT team created Norman as part of an experiment to see what training AI on data from the dark corners of the net would do to its worldview. That's what they're trying to do here. It was like an experiment. So among the images the software was shown was people dying in horrible circumstances, culled from a group on Reddit. And after that, the AI was shown different ink blot drawings, like the Rorschach test things. And this is typically used by psychologists to help assess a patient's state of mind. And it was asked what it saw in each of them. And each time, Norman saw dead bodies, blood, and destruction. Artificial intelligence is no longer science fiction. It's being used across a range of industries, including with personal assistant devices, email filtering, online search functions, voice, facial recognition. It's probably Norman that keeps suppressing this channel from YouTube and won't let any of you get notifications. They probably already let it loose. But researchers at MIT also trained another AI with images of cats and birds and people, nice things, which made a big difference. It saw more cheerful images in the same abstract blots of ink. So researchers said Norman's dark responses illustrate the harsh reality of machine learning. Professor Ayad Rawan, part of a 3-person team from MIT's media lab that developed Norman, told the BBC, quote, "Data matters more than the algorithm. It highlights the idea that the data we use to train AI is reflected in the way the AI perceives the world and how it behaves," end quote. So if AI can be fed data giving it a dismal worldview, could it prompt other biases? Now, in May of 2016, a ProPublica report claimed that an AI-generated computer program used by a U.S. court for risk assessment was biased against Black prisoners. The program flagged that Black people were twice as likely as white people to reoffend as a result of the flawed information it was learning from. And at other times, the data that AI is learning from can be gamed by humans intent on causing trouble. And when Microsoft's chat box Tay was released on Twitter in 2016, the bot quickly proved a hit with racists and trolls who taught it to defend white supremacists, called for genocide, and expressed a fondness for Hitler, if you remember that. This is why humans will never be able to perfect AI in the way that they think they can, because they're already human. We're already human and flawed. We can't perfect something beyond that. It just doesn't work. All of our flaws, at best, we create something that we already are and then give it way more power than we have access to. We don't have the type of computing power that a computer does, that an AI would have. But you can, they talked about you can game the system, you can game the AI. Well, you can do that with people too. You can manipulate people. You can manipulate people into thinking that the world is a dark and dismal place. You can turn people into nihilists pretty easily. so it wouldn't be any different with AI, and that's why it's so dangerous. That's why even though Google tries to say that they can promise their AI won't be evil, they can't promise that because they can't even define what evil actually is. They can't define that. There's no definition that they'll accept. So, yeah, just bad stuff. So, what happens when an AI just gets loose in the internet and just finds everything there is? It depends on the outlook. The internet. It seems like the more a person uses the internet, and I don't mean for one or two specific things, but I just mean more broadly. If a person is exposed to everything on the internet, sure, there's some good things, but there's a lot more bad things, I think, than there are good things on the internet. There's a lot of Bible verses and there's a lot of that kind of stuff, but there's also a lot of torture porn, and there's a lot of dark web stuff that involve rape and murder and just terrible things. I think there's a lot more of that stuff. So if you release an AI, if that would mess with a person's head, of course it's going to mess with an artificial intelligence who is created by a person, who by nature is biased anyway. People are just naturally biased. That's why you can never really get non-biased news. I think that's pretty impossible, unless it's just absolutely the most boring thing that you ever listen to ever. But you're never really going to get unbiased news. I mean, I'm definitely biased, and so are you. We all are. So, trying to hide away from that fact isn't going to help. But the programmers who are programming this AI are going to be biased, and the AI itself is going to have a bias on many factors that we probably have no way of determining. So it's something that we should keep our eyes on. I am interested to know what you think. Okay, we have an exciting interview with candidate for U.S. Senate from Missouri, Austin Petersen. Now, I'll tell you, I did not bring Austin Petersen on because he's a Christian. He's actually not a Christian. He is an agnostic. But we did talk about that. We did talk about it. Now, what I really respect about him is, as far as I know, no one asked him to just go and be public. Usually, he's running as a Republican. He's actually a libertarian, but on that side of the aisle, it's unpopular to not be a Christian, and a lot of politicians have felt the need to lie about it, like Obama. He lied about being a Christian. Clearly, he's not a Christian. A lot of politicians have felt the need to lie about it for votes. What I like about Austin Petersen, and believe me, this is not going to be one of those things where I tell you who to vote for, because I'm not going to do that at all. If you like Josh Hawley, great. If you like there's a Democrat running, and I don't remember her name right now, but I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I sent out interview requests, and he was the one that replied. Josh Hawley did not accept my invitation, so I took what I could get, and I'm very happy that I did. He's a little rough around the edges, what we Christians might consider rough around the edges, which actually I kind of like. As a politician, I like that because to me it's more honest. It rings more honest to me. I'm not really, he's not, well, I'll just say this. He's not dropping F-bombs or anything like that, but to what some Christians might find enjoyable, he cusses a little bit, but it's really not that big of a deal. I wasn't thrown off by it. I probably, I would understand if you wouldn't want your kids in the room or whatever, but it's not, like I said, he's not dropping F-bombs. But again, one of the things that come up is we talked about how he is agnostic, and he is surprised by how people have a fascination with that. And I said, well, I'm surprised by it too, because evangelicals right now, we're getting a lot of flack because we voted in President Trump, and he's not a very moral person. He cheated on his wife and the whole Stormy Daniels stuff. Blah, blah, blah. And for people who don't take the time to understand Christianity or evangelicals or why we vote the way we do, for those, they just criticize, and they don't take the time to learn. They don't have enough respect to learn why that's acceptable. They just decide, oh, well, they're just immoral. They're just as immoral as Trump, and they don't know what they're talking about. And ultimately it just goes back to, well, we don't have to listen to what they say about the Bible or God or heaven or sin or any of this. we don't have to take any responsibility for our actions and our views because Christians elected Donald Trump and he's a bad guy, and so they're hypocrites. But they're not taking the time to actually understand why we did that. For one thing, definitely a lesser of two evils circumstance. But for another thing, when Christians vote, we don't vote in pastors. We don't vote in who's going to be our pastor. We vote in who's going to be our president. I mean, it's kind of like, duh, it's not that hard to understand. And when presented with a choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, of course, by and large, Christians are either going to not vote, which personally I don't recommend. I think you should vote, but that's just me. Believe me, I'd be the biggest hypocrite in the world if I ever criticized somebody for not voting. I didn't start voting until Donald Trump ran for president, so I can't really, that's not a hill I would die on. But either they would not vote or they would vote for Trump because at least he's let's say pro-life. At least he's pro-life. Hillary Clinton is definitely. I would say pro-abortion. We like to say pro-choice, whatever. I would say she's pro-abortion, and that alone, for me, there's no other. And I'm not like this with any other issue, and it's because I don't think that abortion should even be a political issue. I think it's a human rights thing. It's just a decency and a morality thing. It's a murder thing. To me, it's just as ridiculous as saying, well, murder should be a political question that, comes up in debates when trying to decide who's going to be the next president. Are you okay with murder? Like, it's just ridiculous. It's like to me, abortion is something that shouldn't even be entertained or it's just obvious. But anyway, President Trump or Donald Trump before he was elected, at least said that he was pro-life. And, people will say, yeah, but he did this in the past and said that, whatever. I don't care. If I'm presented with a choice that at least he's saying he's pro-life and he has done more towards that end than he has the other. He's at least been able to cut some funding for Planned Parenthood. Not as much as I would like, but it's definitely a lot more than we would see if Hillary Clinton were president. So you got that choice, or you got Hillary Clinton, who is totally on the abortion bandwagon and would would fund that all as much as she could possibly do it, and hike up our taxes to do it, and just all sorts of things. That alone, it was an easy decision for me, and I think for most Christians, because again, we're not. What other choice do we have? It would be worse for us, I think, as Christians if we voted in Hillary Clinton just because Donald Trump was the unpopular choice. You get that argument from people who don't take the time to understand what Christians are all about. They are ignorant. We're not. Now, what I like about Austin Peterson is and you'll see in this interview, we had such a good conversation because even though he's not a Christian himself, he's taken the time to understand Christians. He's taken time to actually understand where we're coming from and where he can have an intelligent conversation about it. And so that's great. And again, if it's just like the Trump thing, we're not voting in a pastor, we're voting in a politician of some sort. And when it comes to that, then you got to look at the policies and everything. So we talked a lot about that. I would have loved to bring on Josh Hawley as another choice to give you the other side of the coin, and still would be happy to. If you're watching, Josh Hawley, if you want to come on, I'd be happy to have you on anytime, and I'm sure it'll be a pleasant conversation, just like this one with Austin Peterson was. And I'd love to do that. But because Austin was the only one that replied to my invitation, he was the one that got the interview. So we're going to talk to. I'm going to play that for you now. Again, fantastic interview. I'm not trying to convince anybody who they should vote for. I just thought this would be helpful. So here we go. Here is my interview with Austin Peterson.
Austin Peterson is currently running for a seat in the United States Senate for Missouri as a Republican, my home state. Well, I guess technically my home state is Michigan, but I moved to Missouri and I like it a lot better, so I'm planning on sticking around. But I wanted to bring Mr. Peterson on to talk about some of his policies and what makes him different from those he is running against. How you doing, Austin?
Hey, I'm never better, my man. I'm feeling happy, bright, joyful, and really excited about the future.
I love it. That's a great attitude to have. And yeah, I appreciate you coming on, Josh Peck Disclosure, and introducing yourself, talking a little bit about yourself. And in case anybody out there isn't familiar, can you give us a little bit background on you and what you've been doing in Missouri and where you hope to take it?
Sure, just Reader's Digest version.
Sure.
I was born in Independence, Missouri, Harry Truman territory, but I was raised on a horse farm out in Peculiar, and my university, of course, was in Missouri State. I was in Southwest Missouri just this morning, and I'll be back there like tomorrow. I've been traveling all around the state. I've been to probably 45 counties in the last year since I announced my run for the U.S. Senate as a Republican. And, 2 months out from the primary, and I'm the only not Josh Hawley candidate that is polling stronger than Claire, that has cash on hand, that has media, that's really getting the word out, and also doing the hard work. I'm shaking the hands, I'm kissing the babies, and none of my opponents, some have tried, but all have fallen short because I'm the real grassroots candidate. We've got great endorsements. I'm the real deal, a true fiscal and constitutional conservative. I know the issues. I'd be a damn good representative of the state of Missouri if people would vote for me.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, what really impresses me, among a lot of things, but what really stood out to me is your stance on the Second Amendment. So first and foremost, what made me want to contact you, I saw one of the most awesome posts I'd ever seen. I saw a post online from a guy running for Senate who, I bet you can't guess who this is, but who said that he was giving away a free bump stock because his opponent doesn't want us to have one. What is the story behind that? I thought that was awesome.
I'm so glad that some people still have a sense of humor these days. It's just I'm so sick of the political correctness. And the guy, he's the chief law enforcement officer of this state, but he just bows down to the left as soon as they come down. And like the president, he's a New York Republican. He's never liked guns, so he makes an offhand remark about firearms. Oh, fine, just ban it. Oh, well, how do you do it? Executive order. Well, like Barack Obama, another constitutional lawyer, he actually allowed them to be sold. So Hawley is to the left of the Obama administration. He's supposed to be the philosopher king, the ideologue. And Trump, who's obviously not an ideologue, just a businessman and a flashy, New Yorker with listen, Trump's badass, okay? I'm not going to lie. Josh Hawley is not Trump.
Right.
In fact, a lot of people compare me to Trump. They try and do it negatively. But, I see a lot of positive qualities in Trump. And I've kicked my own people's ass, libertarians, and told them, you need to learn from this man because he's got something you don't. There's a bunch of engineers over there. We need more salesmen. And Trump is the consummate salesman. What is Josh Hawley selling us on? That, he's the guy that's going to run against Claire but not beat her. Why is Josh better than Claire? What's the story here? What's the dialogue? What's the narrative? The way the establishment is trying to spin it here in Missouri, it stinks. It's huge, a huge steaming pile of gum. Mitch McConnell and the Republican establishment are trying to take a huge, Great Dane-sized whiz down the leg of Missouri voters, and a lot of Republicans aren't falling for it.
Yeah, I hear you. And so besides the Second Amendment stuff, besides what we've already talked about, if you win, what would you do differently than your opponents right now would do if they were to win, in your opinion?
Oh my gosh, it's like night and day. There's a reason why you kind of either love me or hate me. Some people, they really get stuck up. Sometimes people are one-issue voters. You can't reason with one-issue voters. There's no common ground to be had because it's their way or the highway. And I respect principles and convictions, and I have my own. But on some level, you got to build a coalition, and I need voters. I need so an open primary here in Missouri. Don't yell at me if I go and I reach across the aisle and talk to Democrats about things like civil liberties and criminal justice reform and things that are important, that are fiscal conservative issues. Where if you are a true limited government Republican and not some big government rhino, then these issues are where you draw the line. Issues like crony capitalism, which is why people hate capitalism. And I love capitalism. I
do too.
Free market economics, limited government, Mises, Hayek, Bastiat, the laissez-faire. That's what I'm bringing to the state of Missouri. That is the heart of conservatism, the soul of conservatism. Reagan knew this. Ronald Reagan knew this. Sometimes I feel like Reagan would be out of step with the modern Republican Party. And because people, they want to divide and be factional, it's like, what's the Monty Python sketch? It's like, the People's Front of Judea. Do you ever feel like we're living in that world sometimes?
Oh, yeah, constantly. And, this is a little bit off topic, but especially with all the censorship online towards conservatives and Christians.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that you're even willing to, it blew my mind that I even saw a post from you, because you are really conservative, and you must have been dealing with some censorship issues. Has that put a damper on things?
Oh, yes, and there's an interesting electoral angle to this, because we've gotten a lot of preaching from the left about Russian election interference, and we've had a massive investigation against our president, and the word collusion has been tossed around pretty lightly.
Yeah.
But if you want to see collusion, Facebook, in their chief operating officer, it was a woman by the name of Sheryl Sandberg, who is a big-time donor to Mrs. Claire McCaskill of Missouri, my direct opponent, the one that I'm destroying by 16 points in a poll, 19 points with women, 41 with young people.
Nice.
The Democrats they will have to divide their forces. Like, it'll be like the Battle of Gettysburg and I'm the Union charging down Little Round Top. Like, Claire McCaskill's, they're dead meat if I'm the Republican nominee, because you'd have people show up to the polls. I mean, can I just segue for a moment?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We had this election just happened yesterday. There was, the California, and here in Missouri we had a special election. But in that special election, the Republican lost by 20 points.
Wow.
There's a reason for that, and there's a reason why that district went for the Democrat over the Republican. Necessarily, historically, a Democrat district. There's so much spin and BS that I think, unfortunately, in order for us to get a national agenda across as like Republicans or conservatives, if you're a true ideologue and a believer and someone who's trying to get something accomplished, at least through the world of politics, like someone myself, is that you have to be able to reach across the aisle. You have to have a broad scope and vision. You have to be able to bring people underneath an idea, make them feel like they're part of a movement. And really, I'm the only movement candidate running in Missouri, and that's worthy of investment. I've raised a lot of money. I have a lot of odds against me, but I've been very scrappy, and I have more cards to play.
That's awesome. Now, in talking about reaching across the aisle, and which I agree with you, you do gotta try to make something work, of course. Now, what we've seen a lot though is sometimes, and we see this on both sides, but I think more from the right, unfortunately, we've seen, especially in years prior to 2 years ago, but we'll see a lot of instances where in an effort to try to work something out with the Democrats, somebody on the right will compromise their, a value or some type of position. Now, do you think that there's a line there, or do you think that there's any place where something like that is necessary in order to get something done?
I think there are ways to go down the ladder from big government, from statism, from total statism, from communism, socialism, central planning, big government.
Sure.
Like, how we climb down that ladder, I don't know that it necessarily requires us to compromise our principles, at least not ones that are of maximum intrinsic importance. I mean, the fact that we can actually form a government of checks and balances, of one that has at least a specter of limited powers in certain respects, and some checks on our individual rights that are enumerated in the Bill of Rights, right?
Yeah.
The strategy for liberty, I think, can be won for the most part without the dirty pool, in terms of what we're fighting against here. The question is where are the lines drawn? They're not drawn along the similar ideological lines that have at least the ones that are portrayed in the mainstream media. There's such a deeper debate or dialogue and more nuance and gray area, and there's unfortunately, like, our public education system is failing us in so many ways. Like, we're just not the top dogs that we once were. I mean, Americans used to be philosopher kings. The founding fathers were philosopher kings. So in many ways, we look at school shootings. I mean, if we're going to have a total cultural discussion here, there's a rot in the culture. And, maybe not everybody has a sort of corner on the truth of it, but if you are looking for how you're going to be, an accomplished, principled warrior, champion for liberty, reaching across the aisle, I don't think requires compromising your principles. I think that there are ways to sort of work together with people of different backgrounds and different ideas and ideologies and faiths and get something accomplished that protects everyone. And that's really just why I believe in the primacy of liberty, of individual liberty. I mean, at heart, just a rabid individualist. And that just means, and that really is diversity. And so it's individualism is diversity. Well, there's the right and left right there, because the left, of course, obsessed with diversity. Mm-hmm. And And to a certain extent, that's what we want. It's why we wear different clothes. We're not communists. We're not all of hive mind. We are beautiful, all singing, all dancing crap of the world, is like, let me say. In many ways the same, but in other ways different. So if you can sort of understand that dichotomy and all the paradoxes involved with that, you can be a successful political scientist. And understanding modern political science, I think that they're for true conservatives, true limited government conservatives, libertarians, constitutionalists, civil libertarian, even civil libertarian MLK types who now understand what dangers big government poses. I think you can reach across the aisle and get things done and still do good for the vast majority of people, promote the general welfare, as they say, and not require us to compromise our intrinsic values, individualism, what makes us Americans.
That's great. And that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I think that is a good way to bridge that gap is individuality really is the most diverse that it can possibly be, and it gets us out of tribalism, which is good too, because that's just runs rampant in our culture today, and it destroys a lot of things.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's
just, to me, it's so rampant and it's so obvious that it's, signaling to a tribe. And like, on some levels, like I think perhaps there's some evolutionary psychology behind this, it's a defense mechanism. But what unfortunately happens is that we get engaged in confirmation bias as a society. We're just talking about psychology here.
Yeah.
And so we want to confirm our biases. We don't want to read something that goes against what we believe, because there's a part of the brain, a chemical, that fires the same signal for when we're being physically attacked. So, if you think that someone is attacking you online on Facebook, part of your brain thinks that you're being physically attacked. It's that same neurosensorial experience. And when you understand these kinds of things about psychology, evolutionary psychology is experimental and no means like totally clinical.
Sure.
I'm just saying, like, in terms of thoughts and ideas of why this behavior is. I think tribalism is a manifestation of that. And it's because we needed it to survive. When we crawled out of the cave, we had to sort of tribe together in order to have solidarity to survive, and we did that for hundreds of thousands of years. Modern human, like modern man, Homo erectus, is a relatively new creation on God's green planet.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because with that, if it's a brain chemistry thing, that makes sense why the liberals and leftists will say, well, a verbal attack is the same as a physical attack. And that's why it's so important that you don't put feelings over facts. You got to put facts first. Well, the fact is, no, it's not the same. A physical attack can kill you. A verbal attack, you're probably not going to die from it, unless you get so depressed you commit suicide or something, I guess. But still, it's a totally different scenario.
But there's more. Can I say one thing?
Yes, absolutely.
So in terms of the social science, like if you rank liberals in terms of how risk averse they are, right? How more willing are they to accept programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, right?
Yeah.
To expect these welfare programs, right? They're more risk averse. They really are. Like, why are the capitalist entrepreneurs Republicans, right? Because we are not as risk averse. We are the adventure capitalists of the world. Sometimes disaster capitalists, and sometimes state capitalists, which are evil. But unfortunately, the left, they're so risk averse. This is why they favor socialism. And, they have their own intelligentsia, because unfortunately, their intelligence, they're like sort of Ivy League, they're higher philosophers of the left, right? They get caught up in the sort of hero bias, right? Where they're like all Napoleon in a sense, Napoleonic, so hubristic as that they cannot accept their own fallibility, right? These are the central planners. These are the people who take their philosophy and make it into policy. These are the Bernie Sanders, who would love to socially re-engineer the United States. The left is about social engineering because it's all to make us safer. Wear your helmets, nanny state, get your license to braid your hair, which we just got rid of here in Missouri. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Thank you, former Governor Eric Greitens. Social engineering, these liberals, they want to control everything. They're totalitarians, and they must be resisted at every turn.
What are your thoughts about social programs like welfare, and are you opposed to them? And if so, what would your solution be to these problems that are generally brought up by liberals and leftists who haven't thought about it for more than 2 minutes? But what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, for further research, I would highly recommend that you watch my video interviews with Ben Shapiro and with Glenn Beck most recently. And we talk about a libertarian and conservative alliance. And what that would mean is that conservatives would accept the libertarian role of the position of government, and libertarians would accept the conservative view of institutions, families, friends, neighbors, and churches. This is how you would solve problems in a free society. But because we live in a involuntary society, right, we are one step away from involuntary servitude. Yeah. We are one step removed from it because it required us through all of human history, civilization, to stop it in 1860 to 1865. So in order for us to go forward and form a more perfect union, I mean, you need, again, restore the philosopher kings, the Jeffersonian classical liberal Republicans, I think that way going forward, society will solve its problems. I mean, I can talk to you about tax reform all day long. I can talk to you about, budgets here, means testing, raising the minimum age for certain programs. There's a million different things that we could discuss. But at its higher level, we can't convince the general public, we can't convince people that these ideas are superior. They will naturally divert to risk averse. And, people are risk averse for different reasons. Some of those reasons are politically incorrect to discuss in public. But we need a raucous battle of ideas. Sometimes I wish that the American system would sort of adopt the British version in just one small respect, where the president, instead of like how remember Margaret Thatcher and her question time?
Yeah.
1980s. I do sometimes wish that our executive would have to submit to a verbal tongue lashing from Congress sometimes. I know that's not popular to say now that we have a Republican president, but just think about how great it would be when the Democrats win.
That's right.
And we have a Republican majority. So it's an ocean of red in little archipelagos of blue in the United States. Conservatism is strong. Freedom, the idea of freedom is still here. I don't get down in the doldrums with all the sort of people who want to cave to big government and cave to risk-averse central planned solutions from Washington, D.C. America is still the friggin' frontier. There's only 330 million people who live in the United States right now, and there's gorgeous free open lands. And, again, it's time for us to start looking inward. Competition. I'm not an isolationist, but I think we need more intrastate competition. I think we need to make it easier to do business in this country. I think we need a more competitive education system. I think we need to really look at the heart of problems rather than sort of try to put lipstick on a pig so frequently about how we make these policy solutions. And I understand broad and sweeping changes require a national referendum in some sense, and many times that's an election, perhaps on a state level. Perhaps in Missouri, that's what's going to happen in my election. And if so, depending on the vote total, you have to say, do I have the will of the people? Do I have a mandate? Do I have 60% of people in the state of Missouri would vote for Austin Peterson? In such a thrashing, one would admit Austin gets to put some legislation on the table next year and perhaps veto. And damn it, if he gets too mad, then he'll filibuster, because that's within the authority of the Senate.
Amen. And you know what was interesting too is, and this I really had a lot of respect for. This was the bump stock thing was cool, but this I really respected you for. As far as I know, no one asked you to do it, but you came out openly as an agnostic, yet a Republican. That's generally well.
Everybody's asking me about it, man.
Listen, I would say that generally the perception is that would be unpopular, but I don't think it is. I think that. There was nothing about that I was uncomfortable about, because here's the thing. The left thinks Christians are idiots, and they think that we vote in pastors. Like right now, a lot of evangelicals are getting flack because, well, how could you support Donald Trump when he's immoral? Because we didn't elect a pastor. We elected a president. We cared about his policies. I don't care what
Hallelujah and amen.
And so when I saw that you just openly, just freely admitted that, I was like, that's actually interesting. That's really cool, because you would think that that's a risk, but I actually think that's a great strength. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called being honest. It's called not being a bald-faced liar. It's called not being a stereotypical mail-it-in GOP golden boy, say whatever you'll take to get elected. Not some left-wing loony Democrat who says one thing and they are not Christians, many of them.
Yeah.
They do not care about Christian faith or values. They've never read the Bible. They don't care. They just go to go,
Yeah.
Like, come on, quit, hassling the people who are honest with you about it.
Exactly.
I am not a church-going man. I have some reservations, and I have some misgivings, and I have some doubts, and I'm allowed. And right. I should not be ashamed of myself. I've made serious considerations about what I believe, and I'm not ashamed of myself. But I get this question often enough, and some people want to use it as a weapon against me, a sword and a spear. But I challenge anyone to debate me. Josh Hawley won't debate me, and he's afraid. He's a big fat chicken.
Yeah.
Claire McCaskill will be terrified to debate me on this subject. There is a reason why I will trounce her this fall if I'm the Republican nominee. Somebody finally got it the other day. I was so excited. On a radio show I was listening, a caller called in and said, yeah, I don't really like that about him, but the people in those urban areas, the metropolitan areas, like Claire's supporters, they may not bother them so much, and she does. That's where all of her votes are coming from. Just because I can put on a suit and tie doesn't mean I can't rock a jeans and boots and go to church. Like I'm a regular guy, and if you want to talk about deep philosophical beliefs, I mean, you're asking me to talk about when my mom died. I have to talk about the doctor that tortured and killed her. I mean, these are difficult subjects.
Sure.
You want to rip me open and say I have heart? Of course I have love. I'm not a robot. Like I'm a human being, and I'm a passionate being. I love my country. I'm a patriot. I got a freaking flintlock sitting on the desk right here, right now. This is George Washington's flintlock pistol. There's a whole history to this. Have your viewers to write in to tell you what it is. But, we love our country too. We're patriots. And Thomas Paine and Jefferson, many people, they had misgivings and doubts. And, they embarked on secret projects to explore their faith. And they authored powerful treatises on religious liberty.
Sure.
I am a religious libertarian. I believe hardcore that all religions must be given respect in some sense before the law. And that means that it doesn't involve itself in religion to a certain point.
Yeah.
And some people who are agnostic, I think what they worry about is that I want to take In God We Trust off the money, or that I want to make people remove crosses from public land, which I happen to find beautiful. But in some sense, if I had to address it, if I could really just express myself here and really deep down and be honest,
yeah,
there are some people who are downright hateful to me, and they are downright bigoted. They are,
yeah, and
I shouldn't have to play defense all of the time. I'm a proud, courageous warrior for a cause, and I believe in something, and I know what I believe. And I challenge anyone who would come at me with a sword to mount up and bring the sword. I'm not a fool. And, I'm not just some dumb country boy from Peculiar.
Right.
I'm ready to be a statesman next year, and I can hold my own ground. And in a debate, I will crush Claire McCaskill. Josh Hawley won't debate me for the same reason. People may see me as a troublemaker, but so was Sam Adams and Patrick Henry. Everybody thought they were assholes. But without Patrick Henry and Samuel Adams brewing beer and grabbing the flintlock muskets when it came time to fight for our liberty, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and others, the anti-federalists, many of them, some were federalists, but no. I love my country, and I'll fight for our Constitution. I have to take an oath next year. I have to take it very seriously. And I will defend your right to believe what you want to believe, and I will believe what I want to believe, and that's called mutual respect and tolerance.
Yes.
And that's how we live in peace.
I love that, and that's really ultimately where Christians thrive. I think sometimes, speaking as a Christian, I'm a Christian myself, and I think sometimes one of our weaknesses, just as a whole, is we don't stop to listen to what the other side says when we find out they're a Christian. Immediately when we find out that they're not a Christian, immediately when we find out somebody's not a Christian, our wheels are turning. Our wheels are turning, and we're thinking, okay, what can I say that'll prove it? Because to us, eternity is on the line and all that. But that can get into some territories that the other person might not be.
Well, sometimes I want to say, Saul, Saul, why dost thou persecuteth me?
Yeah.
Because it feels like I understand evangelicalism and I respect it. You know who I love are the Mormons, and that really makes some people angry.
Yeah.
I love Mormons. I don't mind that they knock on my door, but they are so polite and friendly and kind and loving, and they are gentle and they are sweet. And I just have such an affection towards them. I know Glenn Beck is one, and Mitt Romney is one. I don't have my political differences with Mitt Romney, but I mean, it's an American religion.
Sure.
That's an all-American religion. And, again, it's hard for me to really pick sides. I want to have I want to have I want to have supper with my American countrymen of all stripes and faiths, and have multi dialogues and things like that. I'm just really I don't like the us versus them.
Yeah.
Again, the tribalism.
Same
I don't
here.
like that. I like the togetherness, the love. There were people that drove me away because they were angry. They had anger in their heart, and I just don't. I have love in my heart, and I'm not sure. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I can be an a-hole, like Patrick Henry or Sam Adams, but it's got sometimes you need an a-hole with love. Chicks dig a-holes with love.
Well, no, I mean, that's absolutely right, too, because when you think about it, who are you going to, when you're having a conversation, no matter what their beliefs are, no matter what they think is right or wrong, who are you more going to want to have a conversation with? For me, I would, when it comes to, I would rather have a conversation with a polite atheist than a self-righteous Christian, even though I am a Christian, and I would probably have more in common spiritually, maybe, or ideologically, maybe is a better word, or with the Christian. I'd rather talk to a polite atheist who has a mutual respect for my beliefs, because I'm telling you, as a Christian, we get into some really dumb arguments. We will argue about the stupidest things.
I know. But listen, atheists are also super annoying. And
they can be. Yeah.
Sometimes when I know a lot of atheists, but when I talk to them, sometimes they remind me of like Stalin, right? Like they're basically like, communistic central planning, stone cold, binary. They're like robots, many of them, and they don't understand the heart and the love and the joy and the passion that exists on the right. It's a shame, that there's a sort of classical romanticism that is lost in the American West, that we've kind of like gotten away from, and much of that is what Hollywood produces. Like the culture that the left has created is just so bland and dull and banal and clean, and so they show these spacious apartments for millennials or up and coming millennials, and it's just like this clean, like totally this aesthetic of minimalism, which can be enjoyable to a certain extent. But I mean, like to me, it's the hearth and home, the dog by the fire. This is if we're going to talk about tribalism, what tribe do I identify with? Like the classical romanticism, the American West, the pioneer spirit, the entrepreneurialism, listen, the cities in our metropolises, I give them much credit. I live in one, actually. I live in Kansas City, and I've lived in New York City, and I've lived in Washington D.C. So I think in many ways, it's given me a perspective on what the sort of the cosmopolitan crowd is clued into. But ultimately, you just really can't get anything better than the old American, good old classic, all American boy or girl story that comes with being a free market, conservative, American Republican, red, white, and blue, and Ford trucks. You know what I'm saying?
Amen.
There's nothing wrong with Western values. And unfortunately, because of ulterior agendas frequently on some of the behalf of some of the elites, some of these super titans, like George Soros is obviously a creepy guy. I don't talk to him, you know what I mean? But listen, I happen to love David Koch, right? Charles and David Koch. I think that they're great titans of industry and philanthropists. Some people see, Soros that way. I don't, but I guess it's unfortunate because in many ways, there really is kind of culture capture by the mainstream media. I think it's going away. This is where the censorship comes in on behalf of social media. A lot of this comes from we're threatening the monopolies of the old days, and what the government wants to do is to regulatory capture, or, things like this, where essentially industry is not owned. Like in terms of central planning, I was reading this the other day, how the government sort of controls industry in the United States. Yes, it's socialistic, blatantly socialistic in many ways, but in other ways, really what they do is they sort of control the stream in certain ways. Like they use the system of taxes and regulations in order to control certain activity, and that's how they sort of enact their agenda. But when it comes to the media, now with the advent of technology, it's impossible to keep a secret anymore.
Yeah.
And so, everybody's going to know your life history in a minute if they want to know it, So it's I think it lends itself to a certain degree of transparency. Sometimes that transparency goes too far. Sometimes it's dangerous. It involves doxing and things that destroy privacy, which I do think that we should have some semblance of privacy in the United States. And we could talk about NSA and national security for all day long. But on the bigger picture, I think we've lost respect for some of our core American values, and that's because of the malign agendas of some. But on the other hand, it's really it's not evil geniuses. Most of these people who are trying to run our government are just well-meaning idiots.
Yeah.
They do, like, if you watch the Facebook hearings.
Oh, man, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's why we believe in limited government, is because when you watch that parade of morons asking those questions about technology.
They clearly have no idea what's going on.
It's going too fast. It's going too fast for them. They can't keep up. The whole system of checks and balances was set up to slow down. And the Senate that I'm running for right now is one of considered legislation. It's of measured decisions, much less raucous than the House. But I would say that, we're back to the election. If you want somebody who can really articulate these things and these principles and ideals and bring that to the upper chamber, I'm the only candidate other than Josh Hawley in the Republican primary who even knows what that is. I mean, if you would ask any of the other Republicans running what a constitutional amendment was, some of them would have a hard time telling you that, just responding to those questions. Lots of people run for office for different reasons. I'm doing it for the right reason. I'm trying to spark a movement, trying to inspire passion, trying to change things for the better a little bit, be a public servant, and bring the values that I claim to believe in to the forefront. And some of those things are ugly, some of those things have warts, and not everything's fully formed. But at the end of the day, as long as I'm not telling you what to do with your life, I'm not trying to control you, right?
Yeah.
In some ways, I'm really just taking over the government so that I can leave everyone alone. Does that make sense? Does that sink in?
Oh, it so much does, and it's so refreshing to hear that. And, I'm telling you what, that's a rare thing, because we find ourselves in this culture where saying something like that is controversial, yet that is what most people really crave. That's what most people really want. When it comes from you, even just in our short talk today, this doesn't sound like political rhetoric or that you're just trying to get votes. It sounds like I'm having a conversation with a guy who knows absolutely what he believes in and he's not ashamed of it. I like that a lot, and I have a lot of respect for that. I'm the same way. I think most Missourians, I don't know how to say that, but we were Michiganders, so I anything apart from that I love. But I think most of us are like that. I think people will have an easy time identifying with that.
I think so. I'm a Missourian. I mean, for goodness sakes, I was born and raised here. I went to college here. I know my state, and I know how people are out here. And so it's a different kind of a state. It's not the American South. It's not Alabama. It's not Mississippi. It's not Utah. It's not California and New York. It's really a very different state. And I mean, I think we don't get enough credit in many ways for how wonderful Missouri is. But we like it that way because it keeps the property values low. You Michiganders, you came out here, didn't you?
I'll tell you, I'm paying less on my mortgage than I did for my apartment in Michigan. Yeah. So it's nice.
Yes, I soon hope to transfer to my own living. I need some Lebensraum here in Missouri. I'm thinking about getting some property too. But
great.
Yeah, I would love to be a public servant because I know that there's an opportunity. I think there's right now. Now is the time. I think about Thomas Paine. I really refer to him a lot because I love him and his philosophy. It was a great biography I read recently, where he said, now is the seed time. They said, is it time for revolution? Because some people were really concerned. Do we need to fight? How are we going to fight the biggest empire the world has ever seen? Like now. And he said, if we don't do it now, they're going to come for us later. There'll be no escape later. Because he could see the future. Thomas Paine could see the future. He could see, the Founding Fathers could see what would happen in the future in a sense. They could anticipate. And that's how we got a good, strong system of laws, and because they had a basic understanding of human nature that was required. And yes, it changes. That's why we have an amendment process.
Sure.
But fundamentally, their philosophy was sound, or their structure was the underpinnings were strong. I mean, just to talk about politics for a moment, Claire McCaskill, the Democrats, if you think about it, I mean, if you're not a Democrat, I'll tell you, I am their worst nightmare. I really am, because they rely on the youth to show up and to sign wave and to be excited about their candidate. And if I'm a candidate against Claire McCaskill, I mean, we're going to have so much fun in Missouri. It's only a shame it's going to last 2 months, because the general's over and be like, well, that was fun. And then we'll put the pop the champagne, and we'll have a little party in Washington, D.C. for the inaugural ball. So it would be I would love to take my oath of office, and I would love to be a good representative. And I know that when you're freshman senator, you kind of gotta, learn the rules of the game to make sure that like what your place is. What I'm not going to be put on the most powerful committee on the first day. I'm going to have to earn my stripes. But I think that there's, if you want that, then you really do need a young fighter. I mean, if the Republican Party is really serious about firing Claire McCaskill, people are not going to show up for somebody that they don't think is going to go out there and fight for what they believe in, and who's going to, give them a show. Donald Trump, give him a show.
That's right. Yeah, and that's the perfect example of what happened. And I'm right there with you. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I could ask you a billion more questions. I really could. This is.
Can I ask you a question? I never do this, and I know this is.
No, go for it. Yeah.
What is the appeal of Josh Hawley?
I think, you know what? I'll be honest with you. I never heard his name until I saw your bump stock post. I think what it is it's just familiar, and people kind of already sort of. I think I saw a commercial with him in it once, so it's sort of familiar. And I don't mean that people are stupid. I just think that generally.
Yes, you do.
well, and then I would have to throw myself into that category. But for me, I work a lot. I've been like busy. Excuses. I can give a lot of them. But with me, it was just a familiar face. And I'm not, believe me, I'm the last person to criticize anybody's looks. But you look at him and it's a familiar face. It's like, okay, I get it. You think you get it, but then you really don't. I didn't know what his stance was on the Second Amendment until I actually saw your post, and then I went to compare it and see if it was right, because anybody can say anything, and you gotta do your research and everything. And you're right.
Love it.
You're right though. You're right. He's a lot softer than you are on the Second Amendment, and that's a big deal to me and to I think a lot of people in Missouri. So
Josh Hawley, come and take it.
So I think it would be an easy sell, because it was for me. For me, it was, okay, I sort of know this guy's name and saw him on a commercial once. I probably won't go and vote because I got to work and, whatever. But now that I know somebody else who I actually had a really good conversation with, and I got some really solid positions, and now that I've had a minute to do research on the other guy, I think I am going to go and vote, and I think I've got a really solid pick in mind, if it isn't already obvious. So, but I think that's the only appeal is it's just he up until hopefully now and into the future. I think now he's just had a little bit more exposure, but I'm hoping that'll occur more for you.
I'm sure it will. 2 months from now, what'll happen is the people who are just not been paying attention. Again, you hadn't heard his name before. People who are not paying attention will suddenly pay attention. I mean, we've seen a flurry of activity in our campaign. A lot more people are paying attention now, and it's just going to get more and more and more until a few million people are really watching the race. And keep an eye out on our campaign, because we've got some more interesting revelations to reveal. And I think we've played our cards pretty darn good for this race so far, to a certain extent. You just can't expect people who have groceries and families and jobs and lives to always be worried. That's why I'm running to be your representative, in a sense, because I know the issues. My job is to go to D.C. and kick some ass on your behalf. But let's hope that people will realize and be enlightened, and let's pull the ballot for something that we believe in, and then not just walk into the path that somebody else has laid out before us. I saw two paths diverge in a wood, and I took the road less traveled.
Well, that's what's great too, is you just in this conversation and through some of your other interviews and everything, you seem to have a servant's heart. I don't know that about Josh Hawley. And because I don't know that, and he's technically a little bit more familiar, that worries me. I want to go with the guy that I know. And I mean, literally everything that you said, you have a servant's heart, yet it's a strong servant. I think that's really respectable. I know that we said 15 minutes and it's been going on 40 minutes now, so I'll let you go. But if people are interested, where can people find out more about you online? What is the best way that people can get involved right now? And if they want to find more information about you, where can they go? What can they do?
Sure, and I'm so grateful for the time today. Thank you.
Sure.
My website is austinforsenate.com. That's austinforsenate.com. And if you want, you can go to my Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and that's just AP for Liberty, like Austin Peterson, AP for Liberty. And Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, hit me up there. And yeah, on our website, you can volunteer. We need phone bankers. We need donations. We need help. We're fighting the establishment, man. I'm out there trying to slay 2 dragons. And, if anybody has any gold or swords that they can forge, if you don't have a sword, as Jesus said, like sell your cloak and buy one. We need you.
Amen. And just one more point I'll say to my viewers. It would have been really easy for Austin Peterson to turn down this interview, because when you go and look on the YouTube channel, and I know he knows what the deal is, but when you go and look on the YouTube channel, I work in television. I don't know if you even knew this, but I work at Skywatch TV. We have millions of viewers. I work there. This is a separate deal we're doing on Josh Peck Disclosure. But when you go on YouTube and just look at the numbers for Josh Peck Disclosure, we're lucky if we get 100, 200 views. We have 20,000 plus subscribers. Actually, I have millions of people that just watch the various things that I do. But when you go online and just look up Josh Peck Disclosure, it would be really easy for somebody to not take this interview. I actually did send an interview request to Josh Hawley, and I did not get a reply. So I think that might have been what happened. I would be purely speculating at that point if I were to guess, but that could have been what happened. But at the same time, I think it takes a lot of heart to go into an interview knowing or at least maybe believing that only 100 or 200 people are going to see it, yet bringing that much fire and passion and really honesty that you brought today. So I really appreciate that. This has been a phenomenal conversation, and I pray all the best for you.
Well, hey, great. And if you know anybody at your television station wants to put me on at a bigger audience, that would be awesome.
I'll see what I can do. Thanks a lot.
I appreciate it. Yeah. So vote Austin Peterson August 7th in the Republican primary. Thank you so much.
Amen. All right. You too.
All right. Again, very interesting guy, very passionate. I think honest, rough around the edges, sure. But because it's not a pastor, because it's a politician, I don't mind that as much. I actually think that that's more honest. I almost prefer that, especially if I know that the person in question is not a practicing Christian. I prefer that level of honesty instead of pandering. Instead of pandering and trying to convince me that they're somebody that they're not, and we get that so much in politics. So it's to me, it's nice and refreshing to have a little bit of honesty for all it's worth, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I appreciate that. So a big thank you goes out to Austin Peterson for this. Again, like I said before the interview, for all of you out there, you do your own research and vote for who you think is the best person for the job. That's the only voting advice I could give you. Or if you just can't vote for anybody, then I guess don't. But I don't personally promote not voting, which is weird for me to say, because again, up until just a couple of years ago, I was totally in that camp. I don't know enough about anybody. I'm not going to vote. But so I don't recommend that. I can look back on that now, and I think I was wrong for holding that view, and I'm glad that I don't hold that view anymore. So I'm, of course, in this U.S. Senate thing, I'm still keeping my options open, because again, I have not talked to Josh Hawley. I would like to, but haven't had the chance. Don't know if I'm going to get the chance. And if not, then, well, I just have more information about one person, and that will probably influence the way that I vote. But anyway, again, I'm not trying to convince anybody to do anything, but I thought that would be helpful, and I hope you enjoyed the interview, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. So again, thank you for sticking through this with me. I know we've got a little rough video, rough audio. The editing isn't as crisp and clear as it usually is, but again, I am kind of locked into one room of my house right now. I'm bedridden for the time being. I can't walk at all. Certainly cannot get down the stairs. So hopefully by the time this airs, I'll be up and around. And so again, prayers appreciated. And hopefully next week we'll have all the equipment. And please keep finances in prayer. All this stuff is extremely expensive. We have insurance and all that, but Well, you all know. You all know more than I do. Doctors, even if it's just a copay, it's going to be expensive. You got to pay a ridiculous amount. I mean, just even for the crutches that I've been using, it's just a ridiculous amount of money. I could have built those for like $5, but you got to spend a ridiculous amount of money on this stuff. And I might need surgery on my knee. It's a rare degenerative bone disease called Trevor's disease. If you want to know about it, you can look it up. But eventually, at some point, I'm going to need to have a surgery, probably a knee replacement, and then something with my ankle as well on the right side. I've already had a right hip replacement. All that stuff, I've been putting it off just because it's so expensive and I can't afford it. And who can? Who can? So, prayers for finances. If you feel led to donate, that would be great. That would really be a big help because, again, these medical bills are piling up and it is just the worst time for this. So anyway, I don't want to get into all my financial woes because I know there are people who have it a lot worse than I do. And that whole thing. So anyway, all that being said, I love you all so much. This has been a blast. I hope it has been for you as well. And until next time, take care and God bless.
You can help fight against censorship by making a one-time donation or setting up a monthly donation to Josh Peck Disclosure at joshpeckdisclosure.com/donate. Or for as little as $1 a month, you can become a Peck patron by heading over to patreon.com/joshpeck. As a Peck patron, you will be entered into contests to have your content featured on the Josh Peck Disclosure homepage, contribute chapters to a collaborative book with Josh Peck, and win a special Josh Peck collection full of materials worth hundreds of dollars. Also, for as little as $3 a month, you will have access to free downloads of Josh Peck books, such as Quantum Creation, Cherubim Chariots, and more. Josh Peck Disclosure is viewer funded. Head on over to joshpeckdisclosure.com for more information. Right now, head on over to joshpeckdisclosure.com, the central hub for everything Josh Peck Disclosure. Every day you'll get brand new videos, podcast updates, and more. Make sure you subscribe at youtube.com/joshpeckdisclosure. Also, make sure you click the bell and select the option to always be notified when a new video is released. Follow Josh Peck Disclosure on Twitter at JPDisclosure and get involved with the show on our official Facebook page at facebook.com/JoshPeckDisclosure. If you're on Steemit and prefer DTube, follow Josh Peck at steemit.com/@JoshPeck and make sure to upvote all Josh Peck Disclosure DTube videos. Keep checking back at joshpeckdisclosure.com for news, information, updates, and more.